when a decorated Latina General assaulted inside a federal courthouse, a conspiracy explodes into violence as 50 armed soldiers storm the building, but she refuses to bow, turning the courthouse into a battlefield where justice itself is on trial. The marble floors of the federal courthouse gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, their polish so pristine that the reflections of the ceiling lamps seemed like pale ghosts dancing just beneath the surface. Court clerks hurried past with stacks of files clutched to their chests, their eyes lowered, their minds focused on the massive hearing scheduled for the day. The courthouse was a place of procedure, of controlled silence, where authority lingered in every corner. But in that silence, something darker was building, something violent, like the calm before a sudden thunderstorm. General Habela Reyes walked with deliberate purpose through the hallway. Her uniform was immaculate, her medals aligned perfectly on her chest, her boots clicking sharply against the stone floor. She carried herself with the air of a woman who had stood on battlefields, who had commanded troops and survived firestorms of chaos. Today, however, she faced a different battlefield, a courtroom where she would testify against a clandestine Black Ops program tied immigration enforcement, a program that had operated in the shadows for too long. Her testimony threatened careers, entire agencies, and reputations. It was no wonder that enemies lurked at every corner. From the far end of the corridor, a tall figure peeled himself away from the wall. His presence was hard, deliberate, predatory. Agent Daniel Harker of ICE moved into her path, his hand brushing the grip of the pistol at his hip as though the act were instinct, as natural as breathing. He had the square jaw and stern brow of a man used to authority, but his eyes were cold, calculating, and sharp. "General Reyes," Harker said, his voice thick with disdain, though it was pitched just loud enough to echo in the sterile hallway. "Didn't expect to see you walking in here without your entourage." Isabella stopped a few feet away, her chin lifted, her expression steady and unreadable. She had dealt with men like him all her life, arrogant men who mistook intimidation for strength. She leveled her gaze at him. "I don't need an entourage to tell the truth," she replied evenly. "Step aside, Agent." The words didn't move him. Instead, he smirked, a cruel tilt of his mouth that revealed more about him than he perhaps intended. "The truth," he sneered. "You mean whatever story you cooked up to drag us through the mud. You should have stayed in your lane, General." She brushed past him, unwilling to waste breath on a man who had already proven himself beneath her attention. But in an instant, his hand shot out, landing heavy and possessive on her shoulder. The contact was rough, an assertion of power more than anything else. The clerks nearby froze, their faces a mixture of shock and fear. Isabella's voice dropped low, her tone steady but edged with steel. "Remove your hand." Harker leaned in closer, the smirk never leaving his face. "What's a uniform without backup?" he whispered. "Just fabric, nothing more." And then, without hesitation, he shoved her hard against the marble wall. The impact rang through the hall like a gunshot. Papers scattered, fluttering to the floor. Gasps echoed from the bystanders, but no one moved to intervene. Pain shot through Isabella's back, but she stood firm, refusing to let him see weakness. Her eyes locked on his, calm even as her jaw tightened. "You just made the biggest mistake of your career," she told him, each word deliberate, controlled. Harker pressed in closer, his breath hot, his tone poisonous. "This building belongs to us," he hissed, "not you. Remember that." The courthouse security guards rushed forward, their voices raised in alarm. "That's enough, Agent. Step back." One of them barked, but Harker didn't move. He seemed possessed, as though the moment had awakened something primal in him. He pressed harder, his hand against her chest now, pinning her as though she were some criminal rather than a decorated officer of the United States military. What Harker didn't know was that Isabella had come prepared. Beneath her dark hair, a discreet earpiece crackled softly, a voice whispering through the static. "Status, General. Do you require assistance?" Her lips barely moved, her voice a whisper only the microphone could catch. "Stand by." Harker noticed her subtle glance and laughed, mistaking it for hesitation. "You think you're untouchable, out there, maybe, but in here." His words trailed into a low growl as his hand drew back into a fist. He lunged, throwing a heavy punch meant for her jaw. But Isabella moved with the precision of a soldier who had trained for years. She pivoted sharply, and his fist struck the marble wall with a sickening crack. Pain flashed across his face as he cursed, clutching his hand. In the chaos, Isabella drove her elbow squarely into his ribs. Harker stumbled back, gasping for breath, his face twisted in fury and humiliation. The hallway exploded with noise, lawyers shouting, clerks screaming, journalists rushing to capture the scandal with their phones. The guards moved to restrain Harker, but he shoved them away. "Wild and reckless now. You'll regret this." He spat, his voice hoarse. "You'll regret ever setting foot in here." But Isabella didn't flinch. She straightened her uniform, adjusted her collar, and stared him down with unwavering authority. "The law will regret protecting men like you," she said, her voice steady, commanding. "And so will you." The tension thickened, the air charged like a live wire. Bystanders held their breath, unsure whether they were watching the prelude to an arrest or something far more explosive. For Isabella Reyes, though, the moment was already sealed. Harker had crossed a line, and she knew, without a shadow of doubt, that backup was closer than anyone in that courthouse realized. The air in the courthouse hallway hung heavy with shock, as if every breath drawn carried the weight of what had just transpired. General Isabella Reyes stood with her shoulders squared, her uniform slightly rumpled from the assault, but her presence unshaken. Around her, chaos buzzed, clerks muttering, attorneys clutching their briefcases as though shielding themselves, a few journalists raising their phones to capture fragments of the confrontation. Yet none of them fully understood what they were witnessing. Agent Daniel Harker's face flushed with rage and embarrassment. His chest rose and fell in short, violent bursts, the sting of her counterattack still burning through his ribs. He had expected her to fold, to retreat under the pressure of his authority. Instead, she had humiliated him, standing firm as though his threats were nothing but wind against steel. The courthouse guards tried once again to corral him, their hands raised in both warning and restraint. "Agent, stand down, that's an order," one barked. But Harker's eyes flicked past them, landing on Reyes with venomous focus. To him, the guards were insignificant. The real challenge stood just a few feet away, calm and composed despite his fury. Isabella, however, had already shifted her awareness beyond Harker. Her instincts, sharpened by years of commanding troops in hostile territories, warned her that the assault was not the end, but the beginning. Harker was just one piece of a larger machine. The program she was testifying against was desperate, cornered, and cornered beasts always lashed out. Then, almost imperceptibly, her earpiece came alive again. The voice was clipped, military, urgent. "General, we have visual confirmation. Reinforcements are moving." Her eyes didn't flicker, but her pulse quickened. "How many?" she murmured under her breath. The reply was static-laced, almost drowned by the commotion around her. 50. Armed, approaching from the east entrance. 50 armed soldiers. Reyes kept her expression locked in calm neutrality, but the weight of the number slammed into her like a shockwave. The courthouse was not designed for combat. It was a place of law, not war. Innocent civilians packed the hallways, unaware that, within minutes, this building would transform into a battlefield. Harker seemed to sense something had shifted, though he couldn't place it. He sneered, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "You think you won something just now," he hissed. "You don't even know what's coming." Isabella straightened her shoulders. "I know enough," she said softly, almost to herself, and then it began. The front doors of the courthouse, massive wooden frames reinforced with steel, burst inward with a thunderous crack. The sound reverberated through the corridors like cannon fire. Civilians screamed as armed soldiers in tactical gear flooded inside. Their boots hammered against the marble, rifles raised in precise formation, 50 strong, their faces masked, their insignias stripped. They were a ghost army summoned from the shadows. The first wave fanned out across the lobby, securing exits, shouting commands in clipped voices. On the ground, everyone on the ground, panic spread instantly. Lawyers dove behind benches, mothers shielded children with trembling arms, and the courthouse guards drew their pistols, hopelessly outmatched. Harker's face twisted into something between triumph and relief. "You see," he spat, gesturing toward the chaos. "This building doesn't belong to you. It belongs to us." But Isabella Reyes didn't move. She stood rooted in the center of the hallway, eyes sharp, calculating the speed of their advance, the positions they took. She wasn't witnessing a random assault. She was reading a battlefield, and unlike the panicked civilians, she was no stranger to being outnumbered. Her voice dropped low, aimed at her earpiece. "Execute protocol. Iron veil. Contain perimeter. Civilians are priority." From somewhere beyond the courthouse walls, her command was received. She imagined her own loyal soldiers, hidden, waiting, now mobilizing. She hadn't come here unprotected. She had anticipated resistance, even violence. But 50 armed soldiers storming a courthouse, that exceeded even her most severe predictions. The gunmen advanced deeper into the building, their boots grinding against fallen papers and debris. One of them, tall and broad-shouldered, pointed directly at her. "Take the general alive," he barked. "Orders are clear." In that moment, the crowd's panic reached a fever pitch. People scrambled to escape, clogging stairways, shoving each other in desperation. The courthouse, usually governed by order, had descended into raw chaos. Harker stepped closer to Reyes. Emboldened by the arrival of his reinforcements, his smirk returned, uglier than before. "It's over, General. You thought you could stand against us with words. You'll be dragged out of here in chains." Isabella's eyes narrowed. She took one deliberate step toward him, her presence radiating defiance. "No," she said firmly. "You've already lost." Even as she spoke, faint vibrations rumbled beneath the floor, the unmistakable thrum of armored vehicles positioning outside. Her backup had arrived. A split second later, the courthouse windows shattered inward as smoke canisters clattered across the floor, hissing, belching thick clouds that obscured the air. Shouts of confusion erupted among the masked soldiers. Visibility dropped instantly. The polished marble floors disappeared beneath a veil of gray. Isabella moved like a ghost within the chaos, her training taking over. She ducked low, weaving through the smog, guiding a cluster of terrified civilians toward cover. Gunfire cracked in the distance, warning shots, meant to control, not yet kill. But the escalation was inevitable. Through the smoke, she caught sight of Harker, his face twisted in confusion. He hadn't expected this. He had believed his side held all the cards. Now, for the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "Find her." One of the masked soldiers roared. "Secure the target." But Isabella Reyes was not prey. She was the storm that turned hunters into hunted, and as her reinforcements breached from the rear entrance with precision and discipline, the balance of power inside the courthouse began to shift. What had started as a confrontation in a hallway had erupted into something far larger, a clash of forces, loyalty against corruption, law against shadows. The courthouse was no longer a sanctuary of justice. It was a battlefield, and the opening shots had just been fired. The courthouse had become unrecognizable. A building once defined by its solemnity and order was now cloaked in smoke and chaos. The marble floors were slick with spilled coffee and shattered glass, the air thick with the acrid sting of gas. Alarms wailed overhead, shrill and unrelenting, a panic siren announcing that the rule of law had collapsed within its very walls. General Isabella Reyes crouched low against a column, her uniform blending with the shadows around her, terrified. Civilians huddled together, some crying, others covering their mouths to stifle coughing from the smoke. She scanned their faces quickly: teachers, clerks, parents, people who had come seeking justice, now thrust into the center of a battlefield. They hadn't chosen. Her radio crackled in her ear. Perimeter secure, a voice confirmed. We're breaching from the west stairwell in 30 seconds. Orders of civilians first, Isabella whispered back. Her eyes never left the advancing figures of the masked soldiers sweeping the lobby with their rifles. Suppress enemy fire, establish safe corridors. Non-combatants are priority. Understood. A burst of gunfire shattered what little calm remained. Bullets chewed into the marble columns, sending chips of stone flying like shrapnel. Civilians screamed and ducked lower. The armed intruders moved with ruthless efficiency, their boots pounding against the floor in unison. They weren't amateurs, they had trained for this, prepared to seize the general, no matter the cost. Isabella took a steadying breath. She had faced enemies before: insurgents in desert ambushes, guerrillas in dense jungle skirmishes, but never within the heart of her own country, never inside a courthouse sworn to uphold justice. The symbolism was not lost on her. They wanted to prove that law itself could be broken by force. Move. She commanded the cluster of civilians at her side, her voice sharp but calm. She gestured toward a side corridor where her soldiers would soon breach. With urgent obedience, the group scrambled, half-crouched, towards safety. Isabella covered their movement, her eyes constantly shifting, her instincts alive with the rhythm of battle. Through the smoke, she spotted Agent Harker. He was ducked behind an overturned wooden bench, his pistol drawn but shaking. The swagger from earlier had melted into something darker, desperation mixed with fear. Yet his hatred for her burned even hotter, visible in the way his eyes locked onto her silhouette. You can't stop this, he shouted over the noise, his voice cracked, half drowned by gunfire. They'll bury you here. Raise. You and every soldier you brought with you. Isabella didn't waste breath responding. She knew men like Harker thrived on intimidation, on their words carrying weight. The best answer to his threats was survival and victory. Her earpiece buzzed again. General, we're in position, engaging hostiles. A thunderous barrage of gunfire erupted from the west stairwell as her loyal unit stormed in tactical precision, sliced through the chaos. Smoke cleared in bursts of muzzle flash as disciplined soldiers swept the area. The clash of forces was deafening, a brutal symphony of rifles, boots, and shouted orders. One of her sergeants, helmeted and armored, slid to her position. Ma'am, he barked, his voice steady even under fire. We've established a corridor. Civilians are moving out. What about you? I'll hold the center, Isabella replied firmly. They want me. That keeps their focus off the others. The sergeant hesitated for only a moment before nodding and darting back into the fray. Isabella rose partially from cover, her eyes tracking 3 masked soldiers advancing through the smoke. Their weapons swept the hall with clinical precision, searching for her. She knew their orders: capture, not kill. But capture often meant something worse. As they drew closer, she timed her breath. Then, with a swift motion, she grabbed a broken fragment of marble from the floor and hurled it across the lobby. It clattered loudly, echoing in the haze. The soldiers pivoted instantly, weapons raised toward the sound. That was all she needed. She slipped in the opposite direction, crouching low, maneuvering closer to Harker's position. When she emerged from the smoke, he flinched, startled that she'd closed the distance so quickly. His pistol jerked up, but her hand was faster. She slammed his wrist against the bench, the gun clattering away. His grunt of pain was swallowed by the roar of battle all around them. You don't get to hide behind them, she hissed, her face inches from his. You answer for what you did. Harker snarled, spitting in her direction. You're nothing without your men. Before she could reply, a masked soldier appeared from the smoke, rifle raised. Isabella reacted instinctively, shoving Harker down and diving aside as the burst of fire shredded the bench into splinters. She rolled, grabbing the fallen pistol, and fired 2 sharp shots. The soldier collapsed with a cry, his weapon skidding across the floor. Harker scrambled backward, his face pale. The arrogance had drained from him, leaving only the hollow core of a man who had relied long on others to do his fighting. All around, the courthouse shook with violence. Grenades popped, filling rooms with choking gas. Windows shattered, under stray rounds. Somewhere above, on the 2nd floor, a chandelier crashed down, shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces across the marble. Yet through it all, Isabella Reyes never lost her focus. Her soldiers were gaining ground, pushing back the masked intruders step by step. Civilians streamed out through secured exits, guided by disciplined hands. The balance was shifting, if only by inches. Still, she knew this was far from over. 50 armed men did not storm a courthouse without a larger plan. Their retreat, if it came, would not be simple. There would be another lair, another trap waiting. Her radio crackled again. General, East Wing is clear, but a pause, heavy with static. Then the voice hardened. They've locked down the basement. We're reading heat signatures, a lot of them. Isabella's blood ran cold. She understood instantly. The attack on the lobby was a distraction, a spectacle for cameras and chaos. The real move was happening below. Her gaze cut back to Harker, who sat bruised and trembling against the wall, his lip bleeding but his grin returning. Faint and wicked. You finally get it, don't you? He rasped, coughing. This is just the surface. For the first time, Isabella felt a chill settle deep in her chest. She had expected a battle, but what waited beneath the courthouse might not be a battle at all. It might be a war. The courthouse basement was never meant to host a war. Its narrow hallways, meant for file storage and maintenance staff, now echoed with the heavy clatter of boots and the metallic scrape of rifles. The air was damp, tinged with mold, and the faint hum of buzzing fluorescent lights that flickered as though even the electricity sensed the violence swelling through the walls. General Isabella Reyes descended the stairwell 2 steps at a time, her sidearm gripped tight, her soldiers following in disciplined formation. The sound of gunfire above was fading, muffled by the floors of concrete and stone. But in the basement, a different kind of tension built, thicker, quieter, more dangerous. Report, she ordered into her comm. Thermal scans confirmed 20, maybe 30 hostiles clustered in the sublevels. A voice replied. They've barricaded themselves. Looks like server rooms and evidence storage. Heavy equipment detected. Could be explosives. Explosives. Isabella's jaw tightened. The courthouse wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of law and public trust. To destroy it would be to send a message that even justice could be reduced to rubble. She knew the masked soldiers hadn't come only for her. They had come to erase evidence, to destroy the truth. She had come here to reveal. At the bottom of the stairs, her team spread into tactical positions. The dim corridor stretched ahead, lined with iron doors and humming pipes. Shadows loomed at every corner. Isabella moved with the fluidity of experience, her senses heightened, her breathing steady despite the adrenaline pounding in her chest. Behind one of the sealed doors, a muffled voice sparked orders. Then came the metallic snap of weapons being loaded. The enemy was ready. Her sergeant leaned in, whispering urgently. Ma'am, permission to breach. Isabella shook her head. Not yet. They want us to rush in. They'll be waiting with crossfire. She studied the corridor, her mind mapping possibilities, recalling countless missions where the first mistake was often the last. We flushed them out on our terms. She gestured, and 2 soldiers slid forward, placing compact devices along the wall. With a soft whine, the machines deployed a thick haze of counter smoke, rolling low across the floor, obscuring the defenders' line of sight. At the same time, Isabella's voice cut sharp into the radio. Detachment Bravo. Seal the exits. Outside. No one leaves this building without my order. The basement filled with the hiss of smoke and the tense beat of boots moving silently. Then, as if some invisible switch had flipped, the silence shattered. Gunfire ripped through the corridor. Deafening in its confinement, sparks burst from the walls as rounds ricocheted off steel and concrete. Shouts echoed, commands, curses, cries of pain. Isabella dropped to one knee, sighted through the haze, and fired twice. Two masked figures fell, their rifles clattering uselessly against the cement. Her team pressed forward, inch by inch, their discipline matching the desperation of the defenders. The basement had become a crucible, a place where each corner carried the promise of death. Through the chaos, Isabella spotted something, a glow at the far end of the hall, faint but deliberate. A server room, its racks of hardware blinking. With pale green and red lights, the masked soldiers weren't just hiding there. They were working, downloading, uploading, erasing, they're scrubbing files, she shouted. Push forward. Secure that room, her soldiers surged, rifles barking, grenades flashing bursts of light that turned the basement into a strobe-lit nightmare. The defenders fought with the desperation of men protecting secrets worth killing for. Isabella led the charge, her boots pounding across the floor. She vaulted over a fallen soldier, ducked beneath a spray of gunfire, and drove into the server room. Inside, the air was hotter, thick with the whir of fans. 3 masked operatives hunched over terminals, their gloved hands flying across keyboards. One of them turned, eyes widening at the sight of her, and reached for a detonator clipped to his vest. She didn't hesitate. A single shot split the air, dropping him instantly. The detonator clattered harmlessly to the floor. Secure the drives, she barked. Her soldiers rushed in, yanking cables, pulling hard drives from the racks. Sparks flew as they ripped the systems apart, salvaging what they could before the enemy could complete the purge. From behind her, a guttural laugh cut through the noise. Isabella spun, pistol raised, and froze. Harker stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 heavily armed guards. His face was battered, a smear of dried blood on his temple, but his grin was triumphant. Feral, you really think you're winning, General? He taunted, his voice dripping venom. This is just one site, one courthouse. The program you're trying to expose runs deeper than you can imagine. While you waste bullets here, files are burning everywhere else. You'll never stop it. His words were meant to break her, to plant doubt, but Isabella's resolve only hardened. She stepped forward, weapon steady. You overplayed your hand. You turned a courthouse into a battlefield. That alone exposes everything. The world is watching now. Harker's grin widened, unhinged. The world doesn't care. They care about fear. And we own fear. Before she could fire, a thunderous boom shook the basement. Dust rained from the ceiling as the walls trembled. Somewhere nearby, explosives had detonated. The ground itself seemed to roar, and the lights flickered violently. "Ma'am," her sergeant shouted, clutching salvage drives. "They're trying to bring the building down." Harker laughed louder, even as cracks splintered through the cement above. "You'll all be buried here, and no one will ever know." But Isabella, Reyes didn't flinch. She leveled her pistol at him, eyes blazing. "The only one buried here will be you." The basement quaked like a beast waking beneath the earth. Dust choked the air, and cracks spider-webbed across the ceiling as fragments of plaster rained down. Somewhere above, civilians screamed. The echoes of fear carried through every stairwell. The courthouse, a place meant to withstand decades of trials and verdicts, now groaned as if it were about to collapse in a single afternoon. General Isabella Reyes steadied her stance, her pistol unwavering on Agent Harker. The 2 armed guards flanking him shifted nervously, their rifles trained but unsteady, as if even they questioned the wisdom of following a man who laughed while the building fell apart around them. "You don't get it, Reyes," Harker said, his grin splitting wide. "This isn't about winning here. This is about erasing. Even if you kill me, the program survives. Files are gone, witnesses will scatter, and all they'll remember is chaos." The ceiling groaned again, a crack zigzagging across a support beam. Isabella's soldiers moved swiftly, pulling hard drives and yanking cords, their hands coated in dust. Every second mattered. She kept her weapon trained on Harker. "You talk about erasing, but you made a mistake," she said, her voice steady despite the tremors rattling through the floor. "You did this in public, in front of cameras. You turned shadows into daylight." Harker's laugh curdled into a snarl. "Daylight doesn't matter. Fear rules the night. And we own fear." Before he could finish, Isabella's sergeant launched forward, tackling one of Harker's guards. The hallway exploded into violence. Gunfire roared, echoing off concrete. Isabella dove to the side as the second guard opened fire, rounds shredding through a bank of servers. Sparks erupted, showering the room in light. Isabella rolled to her feet, firing to precise shots. The second guard dropped, his weapon clattering. Across the floor, her soldiers surged, subduing the first guard. That left Harker. He stumbled backward, pulling a blade from his boot, the grin returning to his battered face. "You don't get to put me on trial," he hissed. "Not me." He lunged out. For a moment, the world shrank to just the two of them. No collapsing ceiling, no echoing gunfire, no roaring alarms, just his blade slashing through the air and her sidestep, her training guiding every move. His fury was wild, unrestrained, but wildness could not break discipline. She caught his wrist, twisted hard, and drove him into the wall. The blade clattered from his hand. He roared, trying to wrench free, but she pressed the barrel of her pistol to his chest. "You're done," she said, voice low but cutting like steel. His eyes burned with hatred. "You think cages mean anything? There's always another me, always another hand ready to strike. Then I'll break every hand." She answered before he could spit another word. Her soldiers secured him, cuffing his wrists and dragging him down. His curses echoed as he fought against them, but he was finished. The floor shuddered violently, drawing everyone's attention back to the ceiling. Cracks widened, dust pouring in thicker clouds. One soldier rushed to Isabella's side, clutching. "The salvage drives. Ma'am, we've got what we could. We need to move, now. Evacuation." She barked, "Everyone out. Secure civilians. Then regroup at perimeter." They moved fast, sprinting through smoke-filled corridors, dragging files and drives, covering each other as smaller skirmishes flared. The masked soldiers who remained fought viciously, but the collapse of their plan had stripped them of purpose. Some fired wildly. Others fled into the haze, abandoning their positions. Isabella led the retreat, her boots pounding up the stairwell. The sound of groaning steel and collapsing stone followed like a predator at their heels. At the top of the stairs, they burst into the courthouse lobby, now a ruin of broken glass and overturned benches. Civilians huddled in corners, weeping but alive, guarded by Isabella's troops. "Move them out," she ordered. They surged toward the shattered front doors. Outside, sunlight pierced through smoke, and the sight of armored vehicles and reinforcements waiting brought a surge of relief. Civilians were rushed into safety zones, medics swarming them. Isabella's soldiers poured out, dragging prisoners, Harker among them, bound and blooded, his grin gone but his eyes still seething. The moment Isabella stepped outside, the courthouse behind her groaned one last time. With a thunderous roar, part of the roof collapsed inward. Dust exploded into the sky, a column rising high, blotting the sun. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but they were out. They had survived. Reporters, drawn by the chaos, shouted questions. Cameras flashing wildly, general rays. What happened inside? Who were they? Was this an attack on justice itself? Isabella didn't answer immediately. She watched as Harker was dragged past her, shackled, his venomous glare locked on her. For the first time since their confrontation began, his voice carried no power. Only then did she turn to the cameras. Her uniform was torn, dusted and gray, her medals dulled beneath debris, but her posture was unbroken, her gaze steady. This courthouse was attacked by those who believed fear could silence truth, she said, her voice carrying through the smoke and chaos. They failed. Justice does not bow to intimidation. And it never will. The crowd erupted, reporters shouting, civilians weeping with relief, soldiers standing straighter at her words. But Isabella knew this was only the beginning. Harker had spoken a twisted kind of truth. There were others, more programs, more shadows, lurking beyond sight. Today was not victory, but a battle won in a larger war. As paramedics rushed civilians to safety and soldiers secured the perimeter, Isabella allowed herself one moment to breathe. The courthouse still smoldered behind her, a scar carved into the city's skyline, but scars, she knew, told stories. And this one told the world that even in the heart of chaos, resistance stood unbroken. She lifted her radio once more. Command, this is General Reyes. Operation Iron Veil complete. Prisoner, secured. Evidence partially recovered. She paused, her eyes narrowing on the plume of dust rising from the ruins. Prepare for phase 2. This isn't over. And as the sun pierced through the haze, casting its light across the battered steps of the courthouse, Isabella Reyes stood, tall, not as a victim of an assault, but as a warrior prepared for the battles yet to come.